Hey guys, my name is Timmy Nguyen, and this is my psychology presentation video. So we'll start with the question: what is the most important period of time for psychology's development? In my opinion, I think the best or the most important period of time for psychology, at least as it pertains to modern psychology and its development, is the 1950s. So two major events happened during this time period that will influence psychology forever as we know it. The first is the publication of the first edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in 1952. And secondly is the cognitive psychology revolution during the late 50s. So let's start with considering the definition of psychology. What is psychology and why is it so important? So, psychology as of the 21st century, as defined in the OpenStax textbook, says that psychology is a scientific study of mind and behavior. And that's going to pertain to cognitive psychology later on. And secondly, what exactly is psychology kind of best used for today? The answer isn't objective, I don't think. But if you were to ask me, it's to really help people with conditions of mental disorders, I think. Most people associate psychology with therapy, psychiatry, among other things. So ultimately, I think its most powerful trait really is the ability to help, which is also why the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM, is the most important event to dictate psychology as we know it today. So the DSM one. So for about a century, psychology was used to understand the human mind, and sure, it was implemented here and there to help mentally ill or distraught individuals, but it was never quite viewed as an official method of receiving help. The publication of the DSM changed psychology forever, basically. So after the First World War, the landscape of mental health changed with more cases of PTSD rising among veterans. This is kind of unsurprising given that the world has never really experienced such like a globally catastrophic event like World War One. There were wars between countries, but the fact that like the entire world was at war and people were being dragged to fight for basically nothing, I think it was really mentally scarring. So, in addition to PTSD, there was also a rise of the art movement surrealism, which depicted unwavering images of the human psyche at the time. Basically, it kind of was a representation of people's anxiety as people realized that the world wasn't safe anymore. And so there were attempts by the American Psychological Association, or the APA, to develop a national classification for severe neurological disorders as a response to the growing cases of mental problems. The Second World War had a similar effect in the number of growing PTSD cases once again on the rise, among other afflictions like personality disorders. Around this time, the World Health Organization, or WHO, published the ICD-6. The ICD is an international classification of diseases, but the sixth edition, importantly, was the first to really include mental disorders. The APA, mentioned earlier, modified the ICD-6 into a 130-page, 106 diagnoses manual that would become the foundation for the diagnosis of mental disorders for modern psychology. At the time, it didn't really cover an immense amount of information that we do now in the DSM-5, but for comparison's sake, the DSM-3 had about almost double the diagnosis and about 7 times more pages, but that publication was about 30 years later. But for being 1952, the field of psychology was still an emerging field, and to have a unified document of accepted disorders and classifications proved immensely beneficial to pushing psychology to being as useful in understanding the human mind as it is today. I compare its effect to the elements of the mathematique. Excuse my French, but arguably it's the most important math textbook ever. It basically consolidated math from algebra to advanced calculus into like one understandable and universal language, albeit it is in French. But it basically kind of synchronized all of math for everyone. It made math kind of like this universal thing. The second event I want to talk about is the cognitive revolution of 1956. And so, considering the psychology definition of earlier, the scientific study of mind and behavior, cognitive psychology being the psychological study of thinking, it really has an immense impact on what psychology is in the modern day. There's not a single person or event that really sparked cognitive psychology, but it has many influences. One of which is the Conference on Communications Theory held in 1956 at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT for short. There's psychologist Noam Chomsky in the left-hand corner, Jerome Bruner in the middle, Alan Newell in the right-hand corner, um, Herbert Simon, Herbert Sinon in the left-hand corner, the bottom left-hand corner, and then George Miller in the bottom right-hand corner. They traded seminal papers and came upon an agreement about the ideas of cognitive psychology. They rejected simplistic ideas of the human mind and continued with the notion the brain was a complex machine. Why this is important is because it shaped the outlook of modern psychology forever. Once the notion of the brain was this complex computer-like machine that can process so many incredible things, there was a greater focus on studying the brain. Given how much modern psychology focuses on the brain and its influence on mind and behavior, I would say the push for cognitive psychology really gave modern psychology its footing. And for fun, I want to talk about Abraham Maslow's publication of Motivation and Personality in 1954. I don't think this event is as important as the other two as it pertains to influence modern psychology as it is today. But I did write about humanism in my perspective paper, so humanistic psychology is something that is like I guess kind of like resonating with me. But I think the sheer influence of of self actualization, having set lists of goals and priorities to achieve happiness, is incredibly powerful. But in this book, Motivation Personality, he introduces the hierarchy of needs, something kind of like ingrained in psychology today, and the concept of self actualization. This really began human psychology as we know it, or humanistic psychology as we know it. And I think it has a very positive effect even today. It focuses on the individual and their motivations to do things, and it actually explains a lot about why one person can or cannot, achieve the things they want. Additionally, entire lifestyle YouTubers or TikTokers have made millions of dollars essentially just regurgitating what he said in this book. So, they can all give this man a shout out. But yeah, to wrap this all up, I hope you enjoyed my presentation on what I believe to be the most important time period for psychology. These two, or I guess three events, I think influence modern psychology the most as we know it. Yeah, and here we're excited. All right, that's it. Thank you guys.